Hey everyone, a very good evening, morning, and afternoon to all of you. Here we are again with our second workshop of this year, which is delivering value through practical US. And the speaker for today is Jonah. Jonah is a user experience designer. In fact, he is currently working as a head of UX at Sportbuff. He's extremely focused on research, product, and interaction design, and he has an experience of over 5 years in the industry. He's energized by solving problems, mentoring, and collaborating with multidisciplinary teams. He's a design leader with a very strong advocacy for the end user. So, why wait anymore? Let's start, Jonah.
Thanks so much for the invite, and it's really awesome opportunity to be here. Okay, so I've got a few slides prepped, and it would be great just to kind of walk you through them, and we'll go from there. The problem with Keynote sometimes is that the screen sharing can be clunky sometimes. So I'm going to try to share my screen and we'll go from. And I just want to confirm just quickly that you can see my screen and that everything's visible.
Yes, it's perfectly fine. It's visible.
Awesome. Well, let's start. Let's get the boring tech out of the way and let's dive into the meat. Welcome to the Practical UX Workshop. We're going to be talking about delivering value the right way. And we're gonna be making a start. We've already kind of had a brief introduction about me, but let's start with you. I would love it if you could use the chat and say, where are you from? Where in the world are you calling from? This helps me kind of understand your context. And also, what's your job title? Feel free to kind of add that in. We have Pakistan, welcome Ali. I hope there's more than one just person. India, Nepal, India. Indonesia, India. Oh, awesome. Guys, thanks so much for putting this through. Lebanon, India, product manager, England, India, Nigeria. Awesome. Well, we have like an awesome international mix here and really looking forward to getting started. So we started with you, but also we needed to define who exactly you are. You are a UXer. Whatever role you have, whether in technology, you are a user experience designer, and this is the thing that you don't need any qualifications for this in a sense, because it's a mindset, and we're going to get started. So I can see a few people have raised their hands. I just, before we blast in, just want to make sure that everyone's good. Can everyone see my screen? If we can just put in the chat, and can everyone hear me okay? Because I would hate to dive ahead. Awesome. Well, let's go, guys. Let's go. So a little bit about me. I'm the head of UX at Sportbuff. I guess my world is split into three categories of mentoring, and I've done a lot of that in the classroom and also one-to-one. I've also got a lot of sort of consultancy experience in previous roles, working at really awesome brands across the world, mainly in the UK, which is where I'm based. And also currently in my role, we're delivering some really exciting stuff with sport. And there's a few NDAs at the moment, but we're really excited to, if you are interested in sport, let's connect and let's celebrate the big project we have coming up. So that's a little about me. Let's also talk about a side project that I started in 2022, and then we'll dive in. So there's a lot of learning and a lot of material out there, and something that I was really passionate about is helping people grow and learn and also learn more about user experience. And so what I've done is I've launched a product called UX Energy, and that's where I'm going to be sharing resources, templates, book reviews. Just for you guys specifically, I want to share, offer mentoring services. So there's going to be some of those goodies that are going to be sent through, also free book giveaways. So there's a newsletter, and I'll be talking about that more. But that's something that I'm excited about, and that's something that my passion is. And so you're all welcome to be part of that. And yeah, just in terms of my passion is also mentoring. And so there's been some excellent people that I've worked with over the years, and being able to understand, help them learn. And I'm really grateful for people that have helped me learn. And I'm just a firm believer in mentoring and helping people. So who are you? We've already mentioned different people, where they're in, your context. And so this looks like the exact course for you, or at least the workshop for you. So yeah, if there's anything that's missed in the slides or anything that you feel you didn't quite catch or you'd like me to reiterate, we'll be sending through an email just with all the details and the resources, and there's going to be a lot of them because it's a practical workshop. And just in terms of what we're going to cover today, this is where we can kind of roll up the sleeves and have a look at understanding that you're not the user. That's just the first sort of simple lesson. And there's other sort of learnings as well that we'd like to do hopefully at a future date. But let's expand this topic. What are the 3 things that we want to try and understand today? And I guess it's focused around practically starting UX research now. So let's go. If there's any other questions, let's dive in. So you're not the user. The first and foremost principle of UX is that you as an individual in your organization are not the user. And I'm going to start by telling a story. And it's the concept of the ivory tower. Now, there was a really big research study done by the OECD, which are a huge international body. And they wanted to try and understand globally, what is the ICT literacy? Like, how smart are people when it comes to technology? And so they did this huge research covering 80 different countries, and they had 4 technical tasks regarding email. And it was quite simple. It was just like, turn on your computer, can you do that? And then secondly, it was like, go and, open up your email. Then the other task was search for something. And then the 4th most challenging task was, go and export your contacts list. It was something like that. And so what's really interesting is that around the world, and this is pretty representative, is that this study actually taught us some really important things. 95% of the world's population cannot do ICT competency. That's insane. And let's break it down. So level 1, which was turn on your computer, there's about 14% of people that were just completely fine with that. Level 2 is thinking about, okay, well, opening up your email, a little bit more challenging, but it's pretty basic. Level 3 is, searching for something, being able to just look up, someone's email and, being able to kind of look through that. The unfortunate thing is, though, sub-level 1 is that there were 26% of people in this survey that didn't have access to the internet, couldn't read, or, didn't have any form of, being able to check their emails. And so when we think about where you are, where you fit into this, you're actually in the top 5%. You're in this percent of like elite, if it was. And so, you work in technology, you have multiple devices in your home, you have internet, broadband, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we think about who we are and who we're designing for, we're actually not designing for, unless we're maybe, building sort of tech software for tech people. Most of the time, we're building for people in the lower levels. And this is super important for us to understand because you're not the user. And so the 5% elite, of those who are often highly technical, and we work in technology, and the problem with that is that we have assumptions and we have biases. We are subjective when it comes to our own worldview, and we think that everyone is just like us, and that's okay. Us as humans, we have to make those mental shortcuts. We have to survive based on biases, but the problem is we have to break out of that mindset in order to reach our users who aren't us, who aren't working inside our organization, who don't know what the business model is, who don't know what our product technology stack is. We're actually having to step out of our building, out of our offices, out of our remote rooms, and actually go into the real world where there are people sat in a Starbucks, on a bus, or in a hospital ward. Those are our users, and those are the ones that we have to understand. And there's a great quote from Jacob Nielsen, the great granddaddy of UX. He says that the single most expensive lesson that digitally untransformed companies have to learn is how unlike their users they are. And that's so important that we have to make that distinction. And so in the Lean Startup book, Eric Ries has this famous quote, which is get out of the building. So that's the first principle, get out of the building. Now, I'm not recommending you jump off the Burj Khalifa and, it's quite a long way down. But, it's this idea that you have to actually step out of your own 4 walls, that you have to step out of that. And if you do work on product or you have a service, Dan Safa has a great quote. It's no longer yours. As soon as you release it, it's the user's. So who's our user? Who's in the sort of the 95%? Well, just to kind of give you an idea, it's someone like this. It's just a random person who is, basically taking up the most of the world's population. We're not like this top 5% elitist. We're actually building for just everyday users. And, she's just a normal person. She has feelings, she has frustrations, she has goals, she has pain points. But we have to start with her. And from there, we can then work backwards. Let's have a bit of an insight into this. So what's the value of challenging our assumptions, challenging our biases, trying to be more objective and trying to understand our users more? What's the value of that? Well, there was a research done a couple of years ago now in terms of the Design Value Index, which was a collection of companies that really prioritized user-centered design or Jemima-centered designs. And looking at the American S&P 500, you can see that the value there of that index fund has grown through the years. And that's because those are just kind of standard great companies. But what about when you look at all of the design-centered companies? Well, when we go into here, we can actually see that the design value index are companies like Coca-Cola, Nike, Apple, Amazon, companies that really emphasize research and the user and UX. And there is then the benefits, the huge benefits of return on investment, increase in sales, all of those sort of value points. And there's actually a huge difference in terms of the value that these companies have, all because they're design centered. And yeah, like there's awesome sort of value there, not just in terms of stonks, if you're part of that community. Okay, and by the way, like I'm just seeing like the chat here, people saying stuff. I can see it in my sort of bottom right-hand screen. So if you want to ask me anything as we go, please feel free, and I'll try and answer it, or just save it to the end. All right, folks, let's move on. So we're talking about the value of UX, and there's just some kind of great case studies here. Forrester research says that when companies are able to kind of improve their UI, their design, well, companies can expect huge returns of investment and huge conversions. But when you apply better UX, which isn't just making it look pretty, it's actually understanding the user better, you actually can see a greater lift in people buying, people wanting to be engaged. And Amazon have a famous quote that, for every dollar invested in UX, it returns, they said something like for every dollar invested, it returned $2 to $100. And so that's huge. So what am I trying to say here? Well, if we're getting out of our building and we're trying to understand our users better, what's the value for us we talked about, but also from the user perspective, we also generate loyalty. And loyalty is the best currency in the world. User advocacy and loyalty is huge. And it's not because of clever technology or marketing, or just because we're nice, it's because we're helping them solve their problems. Okay, so we're going to park up and we're going to ask ourselves some more sort of challenging questions because it's a practical workshop, right? How might your organization be biased? What assumptions do you make about your own users? If you're a game developer, if you're a product owner, if you're a designer, what organization sort of biases do you have? What assumptions? Phrases like, oh, our users don't like that, or well, to me, I like this. Do you see how we're keeping it all within our own world and what we think the users want? So who are your end users? What are the categories that they have? Have you identified them? Or are they just in this bucket called users and you just check how many downloads you get a month? Or are there categories? Do you have a deep, rich understanding of them? And I guess within your own organization, how much of UX is actually prioritized? How much value does the organization see? Or in other words, how much budget is actually devoted to understanding your users? And this isn't just like market research. This isn't just selling better. This is the deep, rich understanding of who your users are and understanding them better. So those are just some quick questions for you. And let's keep moving on. Discovery. Discovery is how we actually get out of our building. It's the idea of us stepping outside and having a deep look under what are the user's goals. What's their context? Like, where are they performing this action? What technology are they using? What's their internet connection like? And also, what's their behaviors? What are the sort of things that they're doing? What are their daily habits? Okay. And so there's a kind of a really good quote here, and I've got a number of quotes that we've got all lined up here, is that life is too short to build something that no one wants. And it's a really good quote from Ash, just trying to think about like, we can't just ship features. We can't just push things out because we ourselves as a company like the idea of them. We have to start with the user. So going back to Jemima, if we remember her, she has goals, she has pain points, and she's got her own ways of doing things. And so I want to introduce a discovery matrix, or like a research matrix that allows us to have a deep dive. And there's multiple methods that we have, and we're going to spend, I guess, the next sort of 45 minutes of this workshop slowing down and having a real deep dive into these specific methods to understand people like Jemima. People who aren't like us, people who aren't inside our 5% organization. So the research matrix is, we're using this from Nielsen Norman Group. They're a really great resource if you've not heard of them. And they present their, their overview of research. And what I've done is I've actually handpicked and sort of recreated this just to make it simpler and more useful. Not everything is able to be covered today just because I've only got an hour to talk. And I also want to give you more sort of practical things that you can start doing today rather than, building a lab and trying to, conduct some really heavyweight research. So what are we doing here? Well, they say that there are 4 different quadrants here of the qualitative and quantitative, behavioral and attitudinal. Those are not easy words to say, let alone to understand. So what I've done is I've actually relabeled them a little bit. That hopefully explains things a little bit more. So on the top and bottom, we have what people do. Jemima does stuff every day. She gets up, she uses a certain app to check the news. She checks a certain app to see when the bus is coming. She orders coffee, she orders food using certain apps. She has certain behaviors, and we need to understand what those are. She also says stuff. What are her thoughts? What's her feelings? How does she communicate how she feels about a certain product? So that's the sort of the top axis. On the left side, from left to right, there's this why and how to fix, meaning it's a little bit more sort of specific to Jemima's little world. And it's very sort of specific on like what she's trying to say. And so it's a little bit more, qualitative, which is another word for saying like it's more conversational. It's more of like her specific opinion. It's more chat. And that's okay, because on the other side, we then have the how many and the how much, which are huge metrics, huge numbers. And so that's something that was worth bearing in mind then, that we have sort of the numbers of 10,000 people said this in a survey, but then also, the more sort of conversational stuff. So that's kind of the layout there. And I just want to then plot specific research methods into each quadrant, and then we're going to spend the rest of the workshop zooming in. And so we're going to have a start. And just to say that this whole session is being recorded, so if you have to miss things or you want to re-catch up on things, don't worry, we got you. So let's have a look at then these methods. So the different methods that we have are from top to right, bottom to left, and so we can see quite a few of them, and you probably might have heard of a few, like, an interview. We're familiar with the term interview, but what about in the context of Jemima? What about usability testing? That's quite a commonly used one. Analytics, if you work in marketing or sales, that's your bread and butter. You use that stuff every day. And then so there's some more stuff that you've maybe not heard of or you're not maybe familiar with. So we're going to have we're going to slice these all up. We're going to take them all out and we're going to have a deep dive. But let's start with the top left and explain this one. There is eye tracking, which is basically looking where Jemima is looking so that we can understand what she's trying to do. Usability testing are specific tasks that help us understand what she's trying to do and how usable or how easy it is to use. And then field studies is maybe what you did when you were back in school. You have the notebook and you just observe what's happening. So a field study is a really good way of just sitting there and observing everything that the user's doing. Bottom left, interviews, and there's a few other sort of variations of the interviews, but interviews are pretty well summed up there. It's asking them specific questions. Tell me about your day. Tell me about what apps you use, and tell me more about the context. So those are very much sort of specific to individuals. It's a lot of data. And so it's very hard to kind of parse. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, we have analytics, and these are sort of more metrics. These are more numbers, and so you can deal with a lot of them, but they don't necessarily tell you what's going wrong, right? Which is why you need both of them. So let's have a deep dive into the top one. Are you ready to have a look at the UX methods? UX doesn't need to be expensive, and so what I wanted to do was try and show you free or very cost-effective ways of doing this research very quickly, starting from today. And also UX methods help you, or it stops you wasting time building the wrong features that no one likes. All right, so behavior. Behavior is then this method of understanding and observing what Jemima's doing. And we're going to have a look into eye tracking. So observing behavior, observing what Jemima is doing every day is really helpful. And there are two different ways of doing this, and sort of the most recommended bit of software is Hotjar. Hotjar is a free-to-use tool that allows you to do three really valuable things. It allows you to see who's looking at your website, your app, your service, and you can actually see like where people are going, where people are scrolling, and it creates heat maps of kind of common click areas. Really useful if you're trying to understand what the users are doing. But you can also do other things where you can actually record sessions of people using your product for free. And so I've just got a little video here of literally just someone going through the dashboard and trying to navigate. So this is Hotjar. It's a great tool for understanding what a specific user is doing. The problem with eye tracking as such is that it doesn't necessarily have anything. You don't have any contact with them. So you can't give them a task or tell them what to do. So it's very much just open analysis. And so you just have to go and do the homework. What about if you want to learn something specific? Well, then we have this other one at the top, which we're talking about, which is not eye tracking, but usability testing. Usability testing is a great way to kind of uncover the emotions of the user while they're using your software, either before or after or during. It's a really great way to identify the goals and the pain points. And you want to be asking questions like, does this experience help the user achieve their goals? It can be very cheap and easy to do. One of those is over a Zoom call. One of those is in person with a user that I'm chatting with. And what's really important is that according to the Nielsen Norm Group, who did loads of human-computer interaction studies on this, they said that testing only with 5 users is all that you need to identify the majority of problems of your system. So that's really helpful. And this is a really great way of really having a deep dive when you're there face to face. You can watch what they're doing, you can observe that. But sometimes that's not possible, especially with COVID. I can't necessarily sit next to someone, and so how can we do that over Zoom or other sort of remote things where you just set it up? Well, there are two platforms, Maze and User Testing. These are really good examples here of products that you create a task and then you just send it through. And from there they can go and self-serve. They can go and do the task, and you can observe what's happening. You can see where they're clicking. So Maze is an awesome tool. That's free. User testing is a little bit more expensive, but still just as valuable. Okay, and so just in terms of the behavior and observing how people like Jemima work, there's another one which is then field studies. And this one's a bit more of a story, because a field study in some senses is just sitting there and observing what's happening. And a famous office equipment company called Herman Miller. These are probably one of the world's most famous sort of office designers that are really great for creating beautiful but ergonomic and really good chairs. I'm on one right now. I'm a huge advocate for them. The reason why they're so good is because it's not because of the design. Like, you can create a beautiful chair, but the reason why it works is because they did a lot of field studies to identify that, back in the 60s and 70s, offices were using chairs like this, and they were noticing behavior. They observed, they sat in, and they had more of a contextual environment where they worked, and they observed how people were behaving, how people were almost having to lift their chair up and move over to the printer or try and chat to friends or whatever. And they noticed that people were sore, that they weren't really necessary sort of lumbar or neck support. So through observing that, they were able to identify those pain points, those opportunities to then change and to then build things like wheels on the chair. And that's why they have chairs like this now that are, world famous, that have beautiful form for your back, that you're comfortable for long periods of time. So those sort of understanding, sitting there and observing how people like Jemima are behaving is super helpful. And so I've done this in my own world. I've done this when working for my local council, and there was a project that we were trying to do regarding waste management, taking out the trash and how that's all handled. Now, the field studies, or the contextual studies that I was doing, was really helpful because I was able to just sit there and observe how the back office and how the bin lorry, as we call them over here, we could observe how things are being done. That I can see that every day that there are around 200 sort of reports that they have to scan, print off, and then type up on their computers. I can also then chat and observe how the routes are taken But then I can just sit inside someone's living room, and as a resident, I can observe what's happening here. And what's really important with this is that these are your typical residents. These are people that have bins, that they have complaints, that they have frustrations. And there's a really, powerful story of the photo on the right. This particular lady had had a stroke, and so she wasn't able to take her bins out. And so being able to observe that, you wouldn't have been able to do that over a phone call or by just Googling around for kind of, nice, sort of, I don't know, like bin removal, designs. You actually have to get out of the building and actually talk to these individuals. These are Jemimas. These are people, different, ethnographic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. Even in this case, she wasn't able to lift her bin. So with stories like this, you're able to inform your design decisions and make better products to make it clearer to understand. Okay, and so let's move on to then thinking about not just like more conversations and more sort of qualitative side. We're going to move over to the more metric side. And then we're going to just, I'm going to grab a drink because it's thirsty work here. So we're going to talk about the concept of A/B testing. And I just wanted to introduce the book by Steve Krug. This is kind of like 101 sort of most famous UX book, or at least one of them. And Steve Krug, in his many chapters, introduces the concept of A/B testing, where you're comparing two different bits of software together. And what's really awesome here is that you're able to optimize the experience, that you're able to kind of keep improving and keep changing. And it is the method of like changing like two different pages together and testing them together. And like there's a great quote that he says from the book. Some visitors of the homepage, they'll only get a chance to get a sort of good first impression once, and that's sometimes really quick. And so what we can do here through A/B testing is optimize and see which sort of designs work best, what formats work best, what colors, what fonts, what layouts are all really good. So yeah, in terms of then a great website to look at, I would really, there's a link here. All of these are short URLs, by the way, in the bottom left, so you can access these. So this is just good UI, and this is an example of they would kind of give two different screens, and they'll actually show the results of what got the better metrics. So in this particular screenshot of like a pay later, that increased 15% of the conversions, and so it's a more of a metrics way of creating a better experience and like optimizing the designs or optimizing the experience. And so, if you're self-taught or if you're, just in an everyday job as a UX designer or, work in tech, I'm highlighting these free resources that are excellent at kind of helping you understand more about the Jemimas of your world. So there's another thing as well, just a quick thing, if you're into more on the visual side, if you're a graphics designer and stuff like that, there's also another sort of variant of A/B testing, which is preference tests. So usabilityhub.com is a great way of like uploading multiple graphics or like a logo or a layout and a design. And then you're able to actually go and send this to, a bunch of your own audience, and you can actually get feedback really quickly of what's the most effective logo, what works best. So that's kind of the more behavior metrics. So, people coming to the site, and you can actually observe what people like Jemima are doing. And there's then the more famous sort of metrics tool, which is, the concept of analytics. And this is then traffic, this is then usage, this is then events that are happening within your app, within your service, or within your website. And, if you work in marketing or you're in sales, the funnel and the marketing funnel of you trying to sign up, get leads, those are all super important tasks that you need to kind of control. And tools like Google Analytics or Heap or ClickFunnels or all these platforms are really good at understanding how users behave and how you can optimize that. And, it also, there's rich data that you can have around like what sort of person they are. Are they male, female, age, what are their interests? So all of these tools are really helpful at giving you really rich data. My personal favorite is Heap, because Heap allows you to monitor all the events that are happening on your website, and it allows you to track specific ones. I'm not sure what happened there. I'm just going to carry on. It allows you to monitor all the events and track specific ones. And so I've just got a few screenshots there. So this is understanding behavior. And so we've just finished that section there around understanding what does Jemima do? Because through the analysis of observing behavior, that then can inform that she's actually very different from us, that the users have a certain way of doing things, that they're maybe slow or they find like a form difficult to fill in. That all helps us optimize and build better designs. Now we're going to come to the other side of the spectrum, which is thinking more around her attitudes. And this is about observation and measuring how she feels, what she's saying. And so this is where we come into more like a subjective area. And what's a really important thing to kind of, I guess, I don't want to like sort of red label this and say that this is potentially dangerous, but if we just rely on specific individuals and their attitudes, that always isn't the best way to make design decisions, because of this particular quote from Margaret Mead, who is an anthropologist. She says, what people say that they do, and what people actually do, and what people say they do are completely different things. And so, users make mistakes, users, forget things. And so this is just something to bear in mind when it comes to having these sort of face-to-face conversations and getting their individual feedback rather than looking at what they do. So we need to kind of have a bit of both and take the more attitudinal stuff with a pinch of salt. So how can we do attitudinal research? Well, the most famous one is interviews. And interviews, as you're probably familiar, is pretty standard. It's just understanding their world. You're able to kind of talk to people, talk about their goals, their frustrations, understanding a little bit more about who they are. And what's important is that we try and avoid leading questions or closed questions. So a leading question is when you say, hey, do you like my design? Or, you're putting words in their mouth. Like, do you think that this website is quite slow? It's like almost putting words in their mouth. You want them to kind of just tell you exactly how they feel. And so you want to have open-ended questions rather than, are you frustrated, or is where they answer yes or no. You want rich data, right? So you want to ask them questions like, tell me how you feel, or like, how does that make you feel, or what are your goals, rather than is your goal to sign up today, if that makes sense. So these are all good things to bear in mind, but there are limitations of interviews. Human memory is flawed, and so people can't always like remember what they do, or like they're sometimes a bit wrong, or they try and impress you, or they maybe a little bit shy, and so they don't feel always able to open up. Sometimes they can be quite intimidating, where you're sat there, it's very formal, you've got your laptop and you're asking them difficult questions. People sometimes aren't always good at telling you all the details. Just because you're dealing with humans, right? And so it's just important to just bear that in mind, but it's still a good way to kind of add to your behavioral stuff. Okay, let's keep moving on. What other sort of ways? So there's this sort of term I'm calling just data analysis, which is basically looking at what's available in your organization. Let's say that you're going to redesign, the experience for a cafe. Well, the way that you do that is, sure, you talk to the owners of the cafe, maybe talk to a few individuals, but there's also probably a lot of data that they might have in terms of calls or in terms of complaints and app reviews and things like that. So, as I say, take it with a pinch of salt, which is a term we use over here, which is basically just like, don't always just like take everything that they're saying. There's a lot of sort of frustrated people sometimes who just like to have a rant. So take that in mind and just bear that in mind. But what's really good is, things like rating scales and things like that. They give you a really good overview at scale. And so you can quickly see how people are feeling, what people are thinking. So that's super important. And what we're going to do then is look at the next aspect of attitudinal research, which is around surveys. And so surveys are, you're probably all familiar with survey, you probably filled them in. The best sort of recommendation I have is to keep them short. And so something that I particularly use for all of my designs and me trying to understand the experience is to use a tool by the User Experience Questionnaire, which is a sort of academically approved sort of survey that allows you to quickly understand and benchmark and understand like how users feel about your product. And so it simply asks 8 questions. It's based on the Likert scale, which is like 1 to 7. So it's like a rating scale. And it covers these 6 areas. Attractiveness. How appealing does your site look? Perspicuity. Like, is it easy to get stuff done? Apologies for these like big terms. This is academics. Efficiency. How like much effort does it take to do this task? Dependability, like, do I feel like I'm in control here? Does this feel trustworthy? Those are all good questions to ask. Stimulation, is it just enjoyable, fun, and, exciting to use? And then novelty, does it, interest the users at all? So I've part of the resources that I provide, part of this course, is a lot of cheat sheets and resources. So I'll be sharing these at the end of the course, probably Monday. But there's an example here where I get you to kind of create your own templates here, and I'll walk you through about how to actually use a quick survey like this. It's 8 questions. You get the user to kind of just tick them all off, and then you can analyze that data. So that's all really important ways of using surveys. There's other surveys you can do of just open-ended questions, and it's all about understanding Jemima's goals, context, and behavior. So you could be like, what are your goals today? What are your frustrations? Did you find what you're looking for? Those are really good questions that, when you send it out to 100 people, you're going to get some great data back. So that's attitudinal research, and I'm just going to come through and kind of summarize this sort of this section just with a final side note. Now, if you build websites that have sitemaps and navigation, this is just a side note. I don't always talk about this, but it hopefully it could be useful for some. But information architecture is where you can group things and structure things and put things in the right place so that it's easy for users to find what they're looking for. So the 2 methods that are often used here is card sorting. That allows you to get with your users, and it allows you to label and group things together. And so you can see here 2 people that I'm working with, I'm able to get them to all the sort of the categories and all the different products that I'm trying to organize, and then I'm getting them to kind of group them together and label them, which helps me then create a better user-centered structure, right? So these 2 gentlemen are not tech people, they're users, right? So helping me be informed with where things go and where they belong. Then there's tree testing, which is another great way, and apologies for the sort of the blur there, but if you squint at it really hard, it'll be fine. This is just a quick way of testing and validating the current structure that you have, right? So if you want to go and test how easy is it to find stuff on your website, tree testing is like the best method of doing that. And it's just a way of clicking through and seeing where users go and seeing whether they're successful in finding what they're looking for. So the tool I use for that is Optimal Workshop. It's free, and it's the industry-leading platform. You can also do it in person as well, but the time it takes to kind of analyze, 50 people's answers and, where they all go is a bit of a headache. So software is your friend. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to stop for a bit, and we're going to maybe have a think around some more practical questions just as we kind of finish up this this sort of overview. And I really appreciate your time so far in understanding some of those different sort of methods. And if you like, we're going to open up a lot of time for questions that I can, show you some of my own work, or maybe show you specific examples. So I've left plenty of time for us to do that. But just for now, as we finish up around this concept of discovery, of understanding all what we can about people like Jemima, what we need to try and do now is ask these challenging questions for us at the moment. So if you create designs, if you create products, if you create code, even if you work, in a shop, right? You can still improve the user experience. It doesn't mean it has to be digital. And so how might you test your current project? Or how might you, challenge the assumptions that you've made in your part-time job as a student, or, in the shop that you work in the web team that you work in, if you're a developer, designer, product manager? How can you challenge the assumptions that you've made? What are some of the ways, things that you've maybe assumed about your users that actually they need to be broken down? And I'd recommend you challenge every thought and every decision you've ever made, just so that you can test it better. So, if you work in a shop, the way it's structured, the way it's laid out, the way that you serve customers, that's what you probably think is the best way to do it. But if you actually chat to your customers, you might understand, well, actually, they prefer it if they had more, layouts change, right? And it's just about understanding them. Or if it's an app, how can you improve the conversion rate? How can you make people install the app better, or stay for longer? How can we increase that retention? All of those sort of questions. Your decisions need to be challenged? Do you have access to usage metrics? What are some of the metrics that you have available in your company? Whether those are reviews on the App Store, whether those like a survey, a feedback form. What are some of the metrics in terms of usage, in terms of Google Analytics? Do you have any form of tracking? Just chat to the team that has them, or just ask permission. And if you don't have any of this, what are some of the things that you could do to start taking and collecting data today from people like Jemima? And then when are you next going to get out the building? When are you next going to take your app and rather than showing it to your friends or to your own team, when are you going to show it to someone in Starbucks? When are you going to show it to a random taxi driver who's just like a random person in the street? When are you going to go walk up to someone? And there's a concept here called guerrilla testing, which is this concept of just quick ways to kind of validate a problem. My challenge to you is go and conduct a field study or an interview just to collect more information about who Jemima is. And you might be thinking, oh, this is like so much work. There's so much sort of different methods. It's a bit crazy. Don't worry. That's where I hopefully come in here as, the workshop facilitator, but also, hopefully we can have an ongoing conversation after this course to help you with these things, which is why I want to be providing you with, I guess, sort of the main value of the course, which is part of my side project that I'm hoping to run, which is UX Energy, where I want to be providing you with loads of resources that are, free to use after this course. And this will be things like journey maps of like the sort of how can we summarize how the user feels, what the user's doing, what her pain points, how can we kind of summarize that into like a journey of them walking into the store or downloading the app for the first time or, buying your service or whatever those steps are. Usability test scripts. I want to do usability testing, Jonah. I want to chat to Jemima, but I don't know what to ask. I don't know how to ask her the right questions. I worry that I'm going to be too leading or I'm going to not understand. That's okay. I'll create a script and we'll talk through, different ways of asking the right questions that really understand, deeply her goals, the context that she's in, or, understanding some of the behavior. A bunch of survey question templates. So back to the user experience questionnaire, how we can create that. And then there's also kind of some quick tips for tree testing and card sorting. I wanted to try and build this resource out, and this is pretty fresh. It was only started early this year, and so I want to try and build this with you in terms of guides or how-to instructions of how to use something like Maze, or how to create your first sort of user interview, and how do you analyze that. And so that's why we hope to depending on how this course goes, create then multiple workshops following from this to have more in-depth sessions. All the slides that I've gone through in terms of just giving you the overview here will be available as a PDF download. I'll give you access to that so you can read the slides whenever you like. But also I want to invite you to then a UX newsletter that we'll be talking through, and hopefully lots more coming. So that's kind of like the big bonus slides. Let me just end on this point before we dive into questions. Guessing user needs is expensive. If you assume, if you break down that word assume, you actually make an ass out of you and me, right? It's this idea of assumptions are wrong. And, we casually make them, but actually we need to stop the guesswork and start the research. And so by understanding your users, you will not only save all the costs of building the wrong things, but you'll also build loyalty for your product, with people like Jemima, and gain a competitive advantage. And so all of those things hopefully make you excited to start this year doing more research, understanding more about your users. And, no research, some research is better than no research, right? Even if it's just a small bit, it makes better decisions going forward. So I just want to say thank you so much. You're completely awesome. And just before we go into question time, is just, welcome you to connect with me. I'm on Twitter. And I'm also building this UX Energy newsletter, but also on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably my biggest platform. I've got multiple people that I connect with all over the world and, chat with them and have mentoring. So do connect with me, and we'll be sharing all of that, along with all the resources. So let's go into some questions. Let's roll up the sleeves and let's see if we can answer them here. And I think we're doing okay on time. And so let's have a go here. So whether you're new to UX, or whether you're trying to build your career, or whether you have challenging questions about frustrations that you have every day with your colleagues, or how you can questions around how you can apply these UX methods, fire away in the questions. I'm ready to hear them.
So, hi Jonah, I'm back.
Awesome. Hey.
Can you hear me loud and clear?
Loud and clear. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. I think we can stop sharing the screen so we can see.
Perfect. Okay.
So I think it was a very insightful session, especially for me as well, because I've learned everything, the difference that UX can bring to your product or anything you're trying to do. But nobody teaches you how to practically imply it, right? Even Amazon said that every dollar you invest into UX, you're gonna get $100 out of it, right? The ROI is 100%. So, but nobody teaches you, how to practically implement it, how to conduct those researches, which research is gonna go with what product, right? Like, is it useful for me, or if it isn't? So I think this was very insightful for me. So before we dive into questions, I have one question for you.
For sure.
Time later. So the question is that you continuously were emphasizing on, how important user interviews are, right? So in your career, what was that one bizarre answer which made you realize that actually what users do is completely different from what they say and what they want?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a hilarious story about this. I was doing a usability test, so I was giving them a bit of a prototype that I was working on, so it wasn't a final design, and I was just asking them to give me feedback. And what was really funny is that they hated it. They were like, oh, this is so complicated, I don't get it, this is so frustrating. And I was writing notes like, this is good research data for me. I'm understanding they're frustrated by this search box. They don't like this contact form. They're really confused about this category. So I'm like really writing down all these red notes. And at the end, and I'll provide this in the research sort of templates, is that there's a final question I always ask about, like, how's your experience? What did you think of that? What sort of, like, how did you feel? And they're like, oh yeah, it was fine. And I'm like, you've just destroyed my product. You've just like hated on it. And then you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. It was a nice app. And so this is the problem with sort of behavior, of seeing how someone uses the product, of like their actions versus what they say. It's just completely conflicting. I was just like, well, I'm going to go on what you've done rather than what you're telling me, because that's just useless data. So yeah, that's an example there. Yeah.
I think we can move to the Q&A session now. So
sure, let's go.
The first question is that what can be the set of criteria we should meet for us to identify a milestone or build a version of a product when we are trying to make a product more and more perfect every single day? So what's that criteria?
Yeah, Mr. Grimmer, thank you so much for that question. And I'm guessing you're more in the sort of key role of trying to understand the product management question, right? Of how can we build a better product every day? And this is partly why I moved out of the agency world and into a product, in-house SaaS product, is because I don't want to just like keep the client happy. I want to actually keep the users happy every day. And so the key sort of world that you need to start asking those questions is combining technology, the business requirements, and also your user requirements. And so the criteria that you need to start developing and the questions you need to start answering is, okay, what's technically possible? What is in the sort of the roadmap in terms of the features we can build, the availability, the budget? But also chatting to the commercial. What do they want to do? Well, often it's making money, right? It's creating more leads, more opportunities, it's building better value, it's saving time. And so whatever those organizational goals are, you need to understand them and then merge them and make what's possible then through your user research. So you might have the business wanting to build this really cool feature and they're like, oh, this is really going to be exciting, we're going to love it. But until your users are on board, it's going to be an awful product. Why am I saying that? Well, take you back to the 5%. We're in this sort of high elite, right? And so we're too in this small organization thinking our product's going to be amazing. Until we get user feedback, it's not going to work. So the word that I would recommend you investigate is KPIs, which is key performance indicators. And those need to be set up. And so you look at your user goals, you look at your your commercial values and what's important for them, and then you create a target from that. So if they want to create a conversion rate increase of 2% for this year, they want to have 2% more sales or more signups, well, that's an organizational goal. Then you need to start looking at the users and saying, well, how can I create a better conversion experience for you? What can I do to remove friction? What can I do to make it simpler and smoother for you to sign up, to check out? And so hopefully that question is answered there. If not, just message me on LinkedIn. We can have another chat.
Awesome. So a very basic query which everyone has is that he's a self-taught UX designer, and what can he do, to build his portfolio and so that it may help to land his first job?
Sure. There's quite a few questions around new starters, which is partly why I wanted to create UX Energy, this platform for kind of helping with this. So it's a challenge. It really is hard to kind of get into the market and try and get your first UX job. I started the slides by saying you are a UXer. And so that is a sort of a basic sort of starter point of you need to tell yourself, I actually can start researching today. Now, does it mean that you get paid for your first product? Does it mean that you're going to get your first job at Amazon? Well, they need experience. And so what I recommend for all students is to start building a case studies and building your portfolio, even based on sort of real world problems that you're trying to solve. So if you go and chat to maybe some of your relatives, like I know, this is just a really random idea. I worked on a similar project before. What are some of the frustrations that, someone with kids, someone who's maybe at home, someone who's trying to order the food in for the week to cook for the family, or, someone who's trying to meal prep, what are some of the frustrations that they have every day? And how can you create a solution that helps that person order food more quickly, get them recipes for their, all of their meals, and to also, save money or, save time? Well, that's a solution that was actually based on, chatting to those users and understanding their problems. Or, this is why Uber became so popular, because it understood that getting a taxi was really hard. And so they try to make it simpler for you to book and organize a taxi. So those are problems. So what I would recommend you do is you're trying to get into the real world is define yourself as a problem solver. Identify problems. You're not the user, so you got to get out of the building. You got to get out of your flat. You got to go chat to users and just try and ask them for projects, ask them for problems, interview them, just try and understand. And so you will very quickly find that there are a lot of problems in the world and we got to solve them. So create case studies around that, start today, and then you can build up a showcase of your work, how you solve problems, and an employer will be impressed and want to have a chat. That's the best recommendation.
Before moving ahead, I just wanted to say one thing. So I think this is the 15th or 16th workshop which we are holding, which we are hosting right now. And I feel more than any other community, the design community is so inclusive, it's so welcoming.
It is.
And no other communities will make you feel so safe and that okay, you can enter it. You are a UXer. You in fact started with that, right?
Yes.
So I think I'm very grateful to be a part of such community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm grateful for all the people that welcome me as well. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is that while working in enterprise domain-based organization, we always have to deal with tight deadlines. So how can we try to implement as much as UX processes while handling deadlines? Because as we know, some UX processes take much more time than expected.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, and something that I even have as a challenge every day. I am going to recommend a workshop and a course that I've not actually been a part of, but it's the Lean workshop that ProApp do. I'd recommend you get a chat with those guys, because the concept of Lean, and I gave a quote from Eric Ries who said, get out of the building. This is the concept of Lean. And it's like, how can we get to the end goal as quickly as possible and in a short amount of time as possible and saving as much money? That's why I recommended some of these resources, because they're quick and easy to do. Now, I'm not saying that we get all lazy and sloppy and we just do minimal work, but Nitin, sometimes there are times where we're not able to do a full 3-week, research program. Sometimes we have to validate it within a day. And so a tool like Usability Hub or Maze are a really quick way that you can put your prototypes on the platform like that and test it within a day. And so at the end of the day, you'll maybe have hopefully 30 of your users come back to you and actually have given you a validation of, okay, does it solve their problem? No, okay, and back to the beginning. And so the concept of lean really emphasizes not just being in this enterprise bubble where you're just designing on an island, but you're actually being nimble and you're being quick. And so I'd really, and if you want to learn more about lean as well, I can talk you through my own experience and sort of my own sort of advice on that. But I'd recommend you, one of the books that I hope to give away is actually the Lean UX book. And so, I would recommend you try and get a newsletter subscription. It's just a joke. But the concept of lean is really good because it helps you to remove a lot of sort of the barriers that you think you need. And it's a way to quickly, almost like a guerrilla attack, quick and lethal, quick and dirty. It's this idea of quickly validating your designs that you want to do, running it, and it kind of removes a lot of the unnecessary work as well. Like if you're spending maybe 6 hours a day designing all these really big complicated designs and it's really time consuming, well, is there a way that you can make sure you're designing the right thing earlier in the process? Can you sketch something? Can you test it out really quickly that way? And that way you can kind of maintain your deadlines and be confident that you're building the right thing. Hopefully that answered your question.
So one of the question is, it's a little long question, but I'll orate it for you. So when you're working on personal, like a passion projects, it can be hard to do user research as you don't have a pool of real users to conduct surveys. Lots of companies have a pool of real life users they can reach out to and offer incentives to them if they take part. But for personal, not real projects, you probably don't. So how do you get around this problem?
Yeah, Dan, great question. And it's a challenge that I think everyone will have. Not everyone has a big budget and a research pool, but I think you're wrong. I would say that it's very easy to create a participant pool. Unless you're building really specialized products that are, for really like 10 people in the world who work at NASA, you'll probably be wanting to do a project that is for things like sports fans, or you'll be wanting to do things that are about recipe apps or about healthcare or about, reminders, whatever your sort of personal projects are. There are actually quite a few people in the world that might fit those requirements. So yes, you can spend money and build a recruitment pool, but sometimes it's about reaching out to your own network, trying to identify people who have a similar problem. There's another thing as well that users are users, and so they might not always fit all the bills, but in terms of a usability test, that's simply just following a number of tasks to make sure that they can use your software. Now, they might be the intended end users, but they are still users and they can still use your product. So I'm not saying that you just grab any person, but in some cases that's okay to do your early testing and your early research. So I'd recommend you go to Starbucks, bring your laptop, offer to pay someone for coffee, and just say, I'm building a product. Do you have, and just maybe ask them a few sort of requirement questions like, do you like sport, or, do you like cooking, or, something like that. But then you can then just ask them, just put it in front of them. 15 minutes is well spent. Hopefully that helps them.
Okay, so the next one is, how does one decide when to design for a particular niche of users or for everyone? Like multiple.
Really good question. Really good question. Something that I want to cover, and we're hopefully going to be launching more of these workshops, is a focus around prioritization. How do we prioritize the right features, the right users? And so this is a really important question. And I think the quick answer is democracy. What I mean by that is not in terms of politics or anything like that, but the idea of a democratic sort of method is that you are going with the majority. So in your research, you might chat to maybe 30 different people, and you might see that like a good number of them, the majority of the users, have this particular flow. This is their main goals, and then they will meet up. That should be your design priority. And then, but what about all the other sort of requirements that they might have? Well, you build that, you support that, but it's not, you don't kind of get these small group of people, this niche, and then you bring the niche into the large pool of people, because that infects their flow and their design. Let me give an example. You're building, you work for Tesla, and you're building, and this is something one of my students was working on, and he was building like a Bluetooth product to connect to Tesla so that you can play music. Now, when you think about like the standard sort of average users, they're all kind of doing sort of the main things of getting into the car and driving. sometimes there's a niche amount of users who maybe want to pair a different phone. Now, that would be annoying if you made everyone pair their phone every time they get on a car, right? And so you want to try and cater for the majority of users. And that's through just asking those questions and then being able to, in your analysis, grouping the user needs and bulking them together and, trying to solve, the majority of pain points in the big one. We can't make everyone happy, unfortunately. So hopefully that answered your question quickly.
So this is how fast are UI and UX changing? Like when you have started, what percentage do you think has changed?
Absolutely. I think if you'll let me have Jonah, a little rant here, UX or traditional UX hasn't changed since the very first start of human-computer interaction first coming into places like Apple, right? So you have Don Norman, and like Jakob Nielsen, these are sort of the great granddaddies of UX, right? And so they came up and they've, given us really key sort of methods of research and understanding the user. And so that's kind of traditional UX. From UI, that's probably the thing that's changed the most, because UI is just how we interpret and how we solve those user problems visually in graphics. And so I think what started off earlier was graphic design, print design, the early starts of kind of people, designing brochures and things like that. The web came about, and so we had, web designer. So that was sort of the main title. Everyone was having a go with Dreamweaver and trying to build these websites. And now what's happened is that we've become really rich and we've understood the importance of UI for our products and our interfaces and platforms. And so I think what UI has happened is that we're no longer calling ourselves UI designers, because there's so many different avenues to work on, whether that's motion, whether that's typography, colors, branding, whether that's style guides, or whether that's, just building everyday UI. So I think that's changing the most. However, one thing that aren't changing are users. Users are still the same. They have the same eyes, they have the same hands, the fingers, and the sort of the human sort of cognitive abilities aren't really changing. And so our styles, our colors, sort of the visual sort of effects that we might be having, the Metaverse, those are all new things of VR and things like that. Those are changing, but our users aren't. And so we just need to make sure that we're making it usable and accessible. And so those things aren't changing, and those are the fundamentals we need to get right, and then we can get creative. Awesome. There's quite a few questions here. I'm happy to kind of grab which ones, or are you going to still read them? I'm happy with whatever.
No, you can pick it up. Not an issue at all.
Yeah, awesome. Sachin, thank you for your question here. As a beginner level, start the first topic in UX. So what do I study? Well, courses like this are super helpful, where you understand the importance of research. And I would recommend that you explore more into that. If you want, try and get a copy of Lean UX. That's a really good book that helps you kind of explore those different platforms. You also need to just find what you like. There's so many different fields of research, of design, of copywriting, of interaction design, motion design, whatever you feel comfortable to do. It's really exciting. For starters, I would start by trying to do sort of what is the problem. If you start there, then it means that the way you solve that can get as creative or as specific as you like. So I would have a go at just starting with a bit of research, talking to users and trying to understand their problems, even though it's really scrappy and basic and you're still learning every day. Try and use the resources that we provide you, asking the right questions and getting the research. And you'll find that it's very easy to then solve the problem sometimes because you've got a clear understanding of the problem. So yeah, research would be a good starter, and then you can get more creative as you go. Awesome. I have a hiring question, and then I'm going to come back to the Metaverse one because that's quite topical. And then there's also Tushar in your games one, so I'll maybe combine that with the Metaverse one. So if you're a person in charge of hiring an awesome UX designer for a very high-profile company, what are the top qualities and knowledge you'd expect out of that person? Well, depending on your seniority and kind of how much money you're trying to get and how much experience you have, that will be kind of the main thing. But I think sort of the top things that sort of one of these big companies would like is all the soft skills, right? So soft skills are kind of being able to talk properly, being able to be professional, being able to, all those sort of things. So those are skills that you can't necessarily read a book on and learn them suddenly. So they take time to develop. But in terms of experience, The most important thing from a UX perspective is being able to show your problem solving and your process. UX process is so important to show. How did you jump straight to the solution is probably a bad idea. So if you just say, hey, here's my design, I designed a cool app, I redesigned Netflix, that is actually not gonna matter. If you think back to school, right? Maybe your maths teacher said, show you're working out, show how you came up to that answer, right? It's the same for hiring managers. They want to know the problem, how you researched the problem, how you understood that, how you tried to solve it, and then you present your solution or you present the research. That's, so really well written case study is going to be super important. And, we could maybe run another session about, I think there's some other workshops as well around good hiring as well. But I would just say that's kind of the top one, is like, show you're working out, show how you got to that solution. Like a UX designer doesn't need to have a pretty looking designs. That doesn't really matter. What's really important for UX is being able to understand Jemima. Someone like Jemima, what her goals and how you solve her problems. And so that's, I would say, the fundamental thing for any portfolio. Yeah, awesome. Any other more? Let's talk about the, I'm loving this, and you just tell me when time's up and I'll stop, because I'm loving engaging with everyone on this call.
We have around, I think, 20 minutes more.
Awesome. We'll keep them coming, guys. And if you want to maybe see specific things, we can maybe have a bit more of a practical screen share session as well. But Tushar, you asked a really good question about testing game prototypes. It's my industry that I work in as well. I'm building sort of game widgets and game experiences. And so what do I do? How do I test with users? Especially when it's, just quick prototypes. How can I very quickly, within the space of a day, know whether a feature is good or not? Now, I'm not able to show you maybe some of those designs, but I can talk you through my process. So to show, when I'm trying to build a new feature or a new design, or something that's fun, for example, a widget that allows you to vote as part of a game. So for example, imagine that you're watching a sport and then you see this pop-up come up, which is what my company does. We want to try and create it engaging and fun. So how can you make that? Well, there's a lot of different tools that are great for prototyping. Rather than building it and spending all that time coding it, which is very expensive and very costly in time and energy and effort, the best thing to do is to prototype it using a tool like Figma. So just for anyone else who's wondering what's a good design tool to start learning, it's free. It's really good for design, for high quality design, but also quick sketches and very basic stuff. And then we also have, it's great for prototyping, and it's great for sharing with developers. So Figma is the #1 tool in the industry. If you want to learn UX, you want to learn how to do good UI, Figma is the best tool. But what you can do within Figma, Tushar, is that you're allowed to add all your game components, and you're able to then prototype them and animate them together and link them up. Now, it's not always very smooth, but if you just Google, Figma prototype animations, you'll actually see that there's so many different ways of prototyping and making it pop and engage, and you can then put that in front of a user. Even though it's not the game itself, it's just a prototype, you can very quickly test that out with your users and being okay, is this fun? And then you can ask them that survey questions that we have. You can run those interviews with them, and you can actually try to determine, okay, is that actually a fun game? Do you remember the survey we talked about novelty, about it being easy to use, that sort of 6-question survey? That is the sort of thing that you need to use alongside your prototype in Figma. So yeah, those are sort of some good advice there. Thoughts on the metaverse? I think it's the same point there. The problem with the metaverse and any new technology is that it often overwhelms users, and we're in the 5%. So companies like Facebook, they're in the 5%, and they're trying to show us all these cool VR technologies that the average person if you have an uncle or your dad, give them your goggles. They'll freak out because they're just standard users. They don't work in tech. They don't understand the VR world. So what I would say is there's still fundamentals of usability, ease of use. Those are so important when it comes to things like the metaverse and any new technology. I've just got a few quick questions I'm going to handpick here about design degrees. And this is a really important conversation because there's a lot of money being spent on boot camps, on degrees, very expensive. So there's a move that's changing. We mentioned about an inclusive UX community here, which is super important. And so we're starting to change, and we're starting to base upon not degrees and academic achievements. We're hiring based on experience and finding the right people for the roles. And so, Iron, your question is really good here, because a lot of the boot camps out there will charge a lot of money in promising you that you'll get a job at the end of it. And what I would say is, I would recommend that you try and get different sort of experience and try and identify companies that offer internships or even mentoring, or even do voluntary work. I would say that in many ways that will give you a little bit more real world experience rather than paying $4,000 on a boot camp. That will kind of just teach you stuff that you could probably Google. And unfortunately in the industry there is a lot of sort of just very cheap and basic boot camps that don't really teach you the fundamentals. If I was to recommend one that is really, really excellent, it's the UX Design Institute, which is a remote course that will give you a degree component from Glasgow Caledonian University. So it's accredited. It's not just a quick bootcamp certificate. Those are good for kind of quick learnings, right? But what's really good about the User Experience Design Institute is that it's a really full course. It's not too expensive. And I would say that would probably, if you did want to take a course that would really ground you, it would be the UX Design Institute. And what's interesting though is that there's a lot of candidates that I will mentor after that who still struggle to find jobs. So doing a degree does not guarantee you a job. A portfolio will. And so some of the best sort of folks that I've worked with and some of the most interesting companies I've interviewed for, they haven't asked me ever about my degree. Now I have a degree in web design and development. I got a 2-1 and I focused on UX, but no employer to date has asked me what my degree was about, because they always care about my experience and what I last did. So unless it's a specialized role or maybe more like a management role, they'll maybe require a master's and things like that. It's fair enough. But to land your first job, and I think a lot of companies in the Silicon Valley world are even stopping to put degree requirements. They're no longer interested in that. And so that's good news for us if we don't want to go to university. Cool. Are there any others, Rashika, from your list that you're looking at that would be good to answer? Because there's some good ones here, and I'm just trying to kind of fill this in.
I believe the common question around is the skill necessary or the degree necessary. I think you answered it really beautifully. So what should we more focus on? Right, so I think it completely depends, and most of the questions are always around what should we start with, like while building a portfolio. What should be the first case study, like if they're a student or
yes,
it's their first design job and they don't have a prior experience. So
yeah,
how
absolutely.
should we start with?
Let's have a bit of a practical session. I'll provide a template that I use with all of my mentor students that I would work with. And I'll just do a quick screen share, if that's okay, about how to create a case study, a portfolio item that will get you hired. Now, I'm not promising that you're going to be earning $100,000 in your first year and you're going to, move to Silicon Valley. I'm not promising that, but what I am saying is that from, a standard sort of template that we'll use, and I will share this at the end of the course as well, is around how do we structure our case studies in a way that proves, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm talking about, which is what hiring managers want to see. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to be using Sketch. So Sketch is my design tool of choice right now. And I'm literally going to just throw it together in a sense. So you can create this as your part of your blog, part of your website, or as a PDF, depending on what you prefer. You might not be a designer, you might just be good at Microsoft Word. That's okay, because what's important here is not how it looks, but how it reads and the information that you share. And so, super quick example here is to when you're typing up that, just explain the case study in terms of like what you're trying to do. So it's like a recipe management app. Sorry, I can't spell today. Management app for busy professionals, right? Let's use that example that I gave earlier. This is a free project for you right here. So that's the sort of the case study. You would kind of want to maybe give a little bit of context around kind of like the dates, how long it took, who was on your team, what tools did you use, just something basic, just like a little project description. That's important to say. And then we're going to use a formula here that's kind of quite often used within the industry, which is the STAR formula. So at the end of my presentation there, I said that you're awesome, but I'm also going to say that you're a star, in the sense that the STAR formula, if we can read into here, it's actually an acronym that stands for situation, which is the first word. And this is just a really good way to kind of explain, I guess, like how to structure a good case study. So the situation, which is explaining like what was the context around the project. You could say, this random guy in a workshop, he gave me this idea, so I, yeah, you can say that. But like, what's the situation? Well, you've identified that there's a potential problem with busy professionals who are unable to kind of create good meals at home because they don't have access to the foods that they need. They're not really structured in terms of the recipes, and often they eat a lot of junk food. Now it's the new year, people are wanting to be healthy, and so this is a kind of a good situation that you could write just to explain the context of the project. So that's the first S in the STAR formula, and the next word is task. So task stands for, now you don't need to maybe create these headings, but you could, it's just a helpful way to structure your portfolio and your case study here. So the task, what did you do? What were the steps that you took? And so I'd recommend that you, every time you start a project, you create a research plan. You identify all the people you want to talk to, how you want to talk to them, and what you want to learn. So recipe management app for busy professionals. Well, I want to chat to busy professionals. I want to learn what their pain points are. And so that's going to be a survey, it's going to be an interview, and I will test other recipe apps and see what they think of them. So that's already a research plan coming about, and you can kind of list that all out. So talk about your task. Then what did you do, and like what were you assigned? So if you're in a company and you want to write up a case study, it's like, well, you were assigned this project and you were in charge of doing X, Y, Z. So that's the task. If we zoom in here again, we have then action. So explain, give clear bullet points. So if I was to kind of give like sub points or like smaller points of kind of stuff that I've done, well, I would talk about maybe doing sort of discovery. So what are the discovery items that I would do? Well, I would discover users and their pain points in a survey. I would, send that out to as many people that I know that do cooking, which is a lot of people, right? So, that's a kind of an open market right there. What else are we going to do? Well, we're going to maybe do some usability testing. Usability testing of competitor products, right? So we can maybe test that with 5 people, test out this particular app and, see what people like about it, see what they hate about it. And then you could learn more, run some interviews. Why not do some contextual field studies? Why not stand in a kitchen and observe how someone makes a meal, and observe and ask them how they, plan their week? Stand in a supermarket, observe how people are buying food, observe that, sometimes they're like, oh, I forgot the milk, I need to go get it, or I forgot the bread, I need to get this. So that's discovery, and then you can start to list all of your action points. And, from there, you can then come into definition. Now, we didn't cover definition today. Hopefully, if I get an ask back, we'll get to maybe explore things like definition as a sort of a workshop where we can take all of the data and be able to kind of make clear decisions. And then we have then other steps around design. What are the design steps we took? How did we solve the problem? And then delivery. So that's kind of how what I would do. It's another resource that I can provide is also the double diamond, which is a really helpful diagram to just show like the process. Anyway, that's the action. And then the final step of your case study should include something like result. What happened? Did you go live? Did you chat to anyone? What was the response? What did you learn? What happened? And so if you'd like, you can take a screenshot. If not, you can wait a couple of days and we'll send this template out to you so that you can fill it in yourself, that you can create your own. And it's a really good structure that shows you the start to end. Now, if you are new, and I would recommend everyone is new in a sense, everyone's learning, I would recommend that you put in the L. So this kind of breaks the word star, but learning is a really important thing. So like, well, what did you learn? What would you do differently? What would you change? What was the biggest challenge that you faced? Just write a few bullet points there to show that you're continually improving, right? You might learn like, oh man, like it was really hard doing a survey. People didn't want to fill it in, but I learned that interviews are really important to ask these questions, and that's all sort of good points. So are there any sort of specific questions around the case study and how to kind of structure that and write that up? Hopefully that was useful for you folks. And yeah, I would just say like, just start small and start build your way up. And that's, all really important questions. Can you suggest a few favorite websites resources dedicated for UX cheat sheets? Well, Mr. Kumar, I'm going to make some cheat sheets for you, and I'll also be highlighting kind of favorite websites. So just watch the space, and I'll be hopefully sending that through on Monday. As a new student, how much time will it take to understand the UI UX up to 80%? So it's a kind of a difficult question to answer, because you're always learning. Like, I've been doing this now for over 6 years, and like, you're always learning new technologies, new methods, you're getting more exposure, you're working on different projects. So you're never going to understand it. You're never going to be finally finished. And if you think, oh, I'm done, the UX is perfect, I never need to work on this again, you don't understand UX. UX is an iterative process where every day you're learning and changing. So as a new student, they say that it takes 10,000 hours to kind of learn and master a new skill. So, if you want to, have a particular number in your head, 10,000 hours, I don't know about that, because, you can have a specific task. You could run an interview, and you can run another interview and another interview. So you have 3 interviews and you build up your experience. You could be confident for number 4. You've learned something, and that's good. But I'm not saying that you're going to be the world's best interviewer. Of course not. But you're still learning. And so this is the beautiful thing about UX, is that I'm not promising that, by taking this workshop, you're now going to be earning millions and work for Uber. What I am saying, though, is that you're starting on a journey to improve and iterate your skills. Kuma, I love your question here. So most of my clients don't really want to get into the steps of design and UX process. All they have the requirements, they want to see high fidelity design as soon as possible. Now, you follow the tailor-made design process where you look at the requirements, design feedback, and you fix and improve on release. How good is this method? If bad, why? This is the problem with the agency world, where it's often keeping clients happy. And I once had, when I was working in the agency world, Kumar, I had the client say to me, Jonah, why do we need all this UX? Now, it's very hard when you're kind of in this sort of model of just giving what the client needs. You don't do research, you don't understand that, like, oh no, we just need a website, just make it tomorrow, which is unrealistic. The problem that this person said to me, he said, Jonah, why do we need all this UX? Why can't we just innovate? Now, you can just do another project for the client and keep doing it, but you don't know, Mr. Kumar, whether you know that product is actually going to be any good, because you're not testing it and validating it. And, the client may come back to you and say, oh, our website is not as good. And I'm like, well, we didn't test with any users. So what was my response to this client when he said, oh, we don't need all this UX stuff? And my response to him was, well, if you want to innovate, you need to take your users with you. We need to understand what the user needs, because we're in this 5%, right? You need to encourage the client to get out of the building. Now, what if they don't want to pay for that and they don't want to do that? Oh, that's okay. So when you have your process here, you said there that it was requirement, design, feedback, fix, approval, and release. The feedback stage should not necessarily be with the client. Now, obviously they're paying you and they need to do that, but you should say like, we want to try and get feedback from your users. Can we speak to some of your customers? Can we speak to some of the users of your platform? And I would just say, like, if you have to try and squeeze it in, try and get some feedback from there. If not, just speak to your boss and try and encourage them to add in a new service that you can sell to your clients, of basically being like, well, to do good design, we need to do testing. And then you just basically source your own participants, and you maybe pay for a company like usertesting.com. It's like $50 a test, and you can go and do some proper tests and then give those to the client. And that's all better ways of doing design. So yeah, the method can definitely be improved, and it's always a struggle with the client not being on board. So that's your job. Okay. And yeah, my pleasure, Mr. Kure. I would just say to all you guys, like, there's so many great questions here. And so, like, I'm not going to get time to look at them all. So, like, please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will spend the time to go through that. Are there any others, Rishika, that you kind of want to prioritize here? We've got one from Rohan, which looks quite good.
Right. So I think Rowan has been pinging thrice now. Let's take up.
Patient man, patient. Yeah, I see it here, right? So he's saying, is there any source to refer to where we can alongside artificial intelligence? I know it's still early days about UX and AI. I just wanted to know about your perspective and what you're doing and staying updated and relevant, going with this new feature of technology. Okay, so these are kind of good questions, and there is always going to be emerging technology. I think I've not particularly done any specific AI related projects. I think the closest I was doing more of like an artificial intelligence chatbot that would respond to clients, and it was just a robot. So that's the only sort of exposure, but it wasn't proper AI in a sense. So you need to try and think about, okay, what are the impacts of replacing a human with AI? What are the process of, because artificial intelligence is in some ways removing the human cognitive process of a human brain, and you're replacing that with a computer that's smarter, cheaper, and easier to run. So when you think about it like that, actually it comes back to standard UX, right? Because we actually have so many different robots or artificial tools every day that we use. Okay, you have one in your pocket, it's called your phone, right? And in some ways that's doing smart things, it's looking at your schedule, it's listening in. You've got things like Alexa, and those are other ways of where we're slowly moving into the sort of the AI world. And so the simple sort of question that I would say for me is like how I would tackle that is to understand how users feel and how they are comfortable using new technology. So we did a project with artificial intelligence in a sense of like Amazon Alexa, trying to do a study on this, and people found it quite uncomfortable, just like VR goggles and things like that. New technology always will take time to be adopted. And so you need to, because AI is such a big field, I can't fully answer your question, but I would recommend, in terms of the best resource for things like that, would be the Nielsen Norman Group. They would kind of be my go-to sort of news platform, and I'll just actually share my screen and show you the website if that works, just because they will have good articles. And so when I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to understand, I'm sure they have things like artificial intelligence. I'm Googling this for you. That's basically what I'm doing. And so they have some really good articles here, about chatbots and machine learning, and there's some good kind of perspectives. I haven't watched this video before because I'm not working in any AI platforms. But this is a great resource. The guy here, Jakob Nielsen, kind of invented UX, right? He was kind of the sort of key founders and kind of influences in this field. So he's pretty good. I'll just share the link just quickly there. I'll try and share it to everyone. I can kind of share all these resources and part of the Monday handover. Okay.
I think we're almost on time. It's just 1 minute more.
Okay, can I do one last question, which is the last one here. So while learning and designing, how can I know whether I'm improving or not? And this is like the sort of really good sort of question, because whether you've been doing this 1 year, 5 months, 5 years, or 15 years, this is a really good question of how am I improving? Am I getting any better? Ultimately, your users, people like Jemima, will determine this, okay? Because ultimately, it's not about you and whether you're a good designer or not. It's about, are you solving problems? The moment you start solving problems, the moment you start become a better designer, okay? Because you can copy and you can kind of be inspired by all these beautiful designs, or you can try and solve problems. But one of the sort of the key quotes that I wanted to share as part of my slide deck was actually around guessing user needs is expensive, and life is too short to build something no one wants. So those are kind of key quotes that helps you understand that it's not about whether you're a good designer or not, but it's like, even at the most basic principle, are you solving problems? And the way that you will know that is by getting research back from people like Jemima, these users that are telling you whether your design is helping them or making it worse. So that's the benchmark that I would look after, rather than comparing yourself to others and trying to be like, oh, I don't feel like a designer. So anyway, I think we're coming to an end of that. There are so many more questions that I would love to answer. That's why I'm going to connect over LinkedIn and provide these resources to you hopefully on Monday. But yeah, thank you.
Jonah, that was a really, really great webinar. One of the workshops which actually had a practical implementation, and you were like hands-on and everything by screen share. I'm like, okay, I'll Google it for you. I think that's the part people like the most. And thank you so much. And you can connect with Jonah on LinkedIn, and we'll share the presentation and the recording with you mostly by Monday, or not later than Tuesday. So we're gonna do that for you. Don't worry about it. And if you like a webinar, leave us a review for ProApp on App Store and Play Store. And Jonah will definitely come back with another workshop. We'll get in touch offline and we'll host one more.
Looking forward to it. Guys, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, for coming on board. Just quickly shout out my LinkedIn there, but we'll give you all the details and resources there. And yeah, look forward to seeing you in the future, part of my newsletter, mentoring, and other chats as well. So we'll catch you guys later, okay?
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.